into the investment business back in the early 1980s. We were selling primarily mutual funds and insurance products. At the time, that's all anybody did, was sell products and earn commissions. As we went through the late 1980s, I started noticing firms like Fidelity and Vanguard that charged zero fees to buy a mutual fund and zero fees to sell the fund. In addition to that, the fees that they charged to manage those investments were much less than the fees of the brokered accounts that were charging 5, 6, 7, 8% to buy them. So I started to feel uncomfortable with the fact that I wouldn't put people in my own family into these high commission products. I would steer them to Vanguard and say, you don't pay anything, and if you want to sell it tomorrow, you can get out, and it doesn't cost you anything to get out. So it costs you nothing to get in, it costs you less to own it, and it costs you nothing to get out, and in most cases, the performance was even better. So I didn't feel comfortable selling all these products and earning commissions just so I could get paid. And I decided that what I would do is I would register as an investment advisor, and I would simply give advice to people with these, what they call no-load mutual funds. There was no fees on any of these funds. There were no loads. So I started providing an investment advisory service for no-load mutual funds. At the time, I would get statements and reports from all these different mutual fund companies until in the early 1990s, Charles Schwab came up with a program where you can buy and sell no-load mutual funds inside one account with Charles Schwab, the first company to come up with that program. After they developed it, everybody else copied it. Fidelity copied it, everybody else copied it, and now there's a whole bunch of providers that do that. The industry noticed that people, Money Magazine and a lot of the financial publications started to tell people not to buy what they called loaded mutual funds with these big front-end commissions. So what they did, what the industry did, was they created another class of shares for these exact same mutual funds, and they called them B shares. And they dropped the front-end load. So there was no fee to buy the mutual fund, but there was a redemption fee. And you had to tell the consumer at that time that if they held the mutual fund for 4 or 5 years or 6 years or whatever it was, that they wouldn't pay any fees. But internally, what the mutual fund company did was they jacked up the management fees to cover that front-end load. So the broker was still getting paid up front for those sales of those mutual funds, and they created an escrow account that was deducting the fee every year from the mutual fund itself. So you were paying more and your return was less by, say, 0.75%. So instead of paying a 1%, to be a little extreme here, instead of paying a 1% management fee, instead of paying a 5% commission up front and then a 1% management fee, what they did was they had no commission up front, but they charged a 1 3/4% management fee. And then they would drop that redemption fee down every year by a percentage point or so, or whatever, until it disappeared. But they collected all those fees throughout the year. So they built kind of an escrow account inside the mutual fund in order to pay the broker. So I found that to be a little bit deceptive. So the industry has always found a way to come back at the registered investment advisor concept. Later, as we got into this century, the year 2000 or so, we started to see what they called managed accounts. So now a managed account is simply a bucket of money that's managed by a portfolio manager, very much like a mutual fund is managed, except what they do is instead of you buying as a consumer, instead of you buying the mutual fund, what you're buying now is you're buying into this portfolio, and physically on your statement, you get a report that shows that you own these shares. You own these shares yourself. You have ownership of these shares yourself. So if the portfolio manager buys 16,000 shares of Exxon, you may have 48.3 in your portfolio, and you own those shares. It's not owned by the mutual fund, so it's a different concept. So it looks like the portfolio manager is managing this money for you, but really he's managing it in aggregate. He or she is managing it in aggregate for a large number of clients. So it's not personal portfolio management. The way I do it and the way a true advisor would do it is I would manage the money for the individual client. And there is no bucket. There's no system to manage that client for a group. I'm managing it for the individual. So that's really the difference. But the point is that the industry always has disguised their products to look like a fee-only registered investment advisor, and we still have that problem today. So it's very difficult for the consumer to determine if the service that I'm providing or the service that an individual registered investment advisor is providing is different than what they have, because it looks very much like, they look very, very similar.